Hi Duncan, how are you?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, a lot going on, but
yeah,
uh,
yeah, sure.
yeah, but okay. And how are you? How you were up in Scotland, weren't you?
I was up in Scotland. Other countries are available, and had a very nice week. Had a very pleasant week. Yeah. I mean, maybe we'll do a podcast on holidays. That might be quite fun because
Yeah,
I find holidays really weird generally,
yeah.
and often quite tiring. But it was a really nice, straightforward week in which almost nothing happened, which is pleasant.
And the weather,
Went in the
I would imagine the climate was very different from where you live.
Well, yeah, as Whitstable entered officially into drought, we arrived in a place where it had been raining for 10 days and continued to rain heavily, constantly for the next 48 hours. Um, so yeah, it was a remarkable change, almost the reverse of the classic English holiday, where you get pissed on for 8 months of the year and then spend 2 weeks on the med. It was
Yeah,
almost the reverse of that. But I mean, I love rain. At the risk of sounding like some sort of teenage goth, I really enjoy the rain and like walking in it and enjoy its magical play with light and sound and atmosphere. So yeah, it was lovely. I had a nice time. We all had a jolly good time. It was very
good,
good.
nice one.
Yeah, thank you for asking. And in the tradition of the podcast, I'd like also to note my approval again for the subtle springtime yellow that you're sporting with your latest fashion sportswear gear. It's a very nice top.
Other brands are available.
They are, but
Errol.
we all know who we all know who wins out of the contest between Adidas and Puma. Um, oh yeah,
Puma, yeah.
or is it Puma? What's the one Adidas? They kind of had a
Like
what's the other
the
company?
big what?
Who? There was
It's
Adidas. There were the
Puma
origins
and
of
Adidas.
Adidas.
It was
Yeah, yeah, that's what I thought.
the business that split into
Yeah,
two. Yeah.
yeah.
I think
Anyhow,
Puma's the more kind of chic one. I think.
yeah, it's less good though, isn't it? I had a Puma tracksuit top, and it was too material. It was like it was insisting on itself. It didn't quite have the feel that I needed as a modern and physically active entrepreneur. It didn't work for me.
Fine. Yeah.
I don't know where it is. It's in a drawer somewhere, and I dare say at some point I'll use it. But there we are. Yeah. So we begin today then with a second go at a format we tried last week, which we didn't really announce, but it's kind of like a broadly interview structure. And the theme this week is dissent, and I'm the inquisitor, and you are the defendant, so to speak. And dissent, I want to frame it a little before I give you a question, because it was my suggestion, dissent, and I think one of the reasons why um, I wanted to kind of talk about dissent or hear your account of the notion of dissent is, and this won't be a unfamiliar point to you. One of our ongoing meta discussions, things that come into various different topics, has been how I perceive art, or at least fine art in the public domain, shall we say, and how quite often I'm kind of a bit depressed by what I see in terms of exhibitions and the kinds of things that come across my browser when I'm interested in art, and occasionally the kinds of texts that come from artists, well-known artists, and then the kind of circulation of various kinds of Saatchi and other awards that are given to various artists. I'm often struck by what seems to me like quite formulaic and even conservative forms of art making, things that may be bells and whistles, may have art in the shallow sense of colour and light and something that looks ostensibly messy, but often signifies, to me at least, very little and seems quite obsessed with consensus seeking. A lot of the language that people use and a lot of the kinds of curating that seems to take place seems really familiar and orthodox. It seems to be desperately seeking orthodoxy, consensus, even though it presents itself as within the context of most other areas where people talk and make art and create, to be on the kind of more edgy fringe of things, right? I suppose, if I was to choose an epitome of that, it would be Banksy, right? There's a whole legion of Guardian readers who think of Banksy as a maverick, and I just see him as entirely uninteresting and largely formulaic, about as edgy as a Satsuma. So my question really, bearing in mind this kind of difference of view we have, because obviously you're way better, you're way more immersed and far more knowledgeable about art than I am. But this is a motif that returns again and again, this kind of sense that I'm not so impressed with art. I think it should do better, and you're obviously more immersed and more engaged and clearly see it more positively. So my opening question is, how do you understand dissent as a property within the artistic process? What does dissent mean for you as an artist or as somebody who's engaged with artistic endeavour?
I thought you were going to accuse me of heresy or something.
Well, that may come later.
Yeah, when you brought it up as a proposition, absolutely great. I haven't actually thought very much about the word dissent. I guess the first things that popped up were like, you can get booked in a football match for dissent. But actually thinking about it, the notion of a disagreement with prevailing, or could be specific, or prevailing forms of legal or governmental, or it runs into a whole bunch of other things. That really
artistically, that's what I'm interested in, because I'm sick to death of talking about politics.
Yeah, no, it then got me thinking that actually dissent for me is like, it's a word I've not used before, but actually is pretty right at the centre of a lot of things. But the thing that gives it a form, so the materials you use, the way in which you might use types of illusion, imagery, or colour, can never directly confront something head on in a way that is 1 + 1 = okay, that's dissent. And my real interest in culture, so that's in music, literature, films, art, etc. It's probably something we've always kind of come round to in these discussions. It's probably closer to something poetically, metaphorically dissent. So I was thinking about books that have really rattled my cage and had this voice that was really dissenting without ever being really explicit. And I think there's something about that. I think dissent, I don't think there is a form for it in a literal sense. I think it has to arrive. At best, it makes you perhaps unstable because you're not quite sure what you think should be stable suddenly becomes unstable. And I think there's something in that which is about dissent. I think any sloganistic sort of culture, fine, it might be a kiss me quick, wonderful little snapshot of something, but actually doesn't actually engage in the things I think we need to engage in, which is about thought, imagination, thinking about what are the right questions we need to be asking, rather than a kind of more sloganistic, stand up for dissent equals democracy, we have those kind of things, where it's a sloganistic thing, which is generally pretty unarticulate. And I think to be articulate in art is a different thing altogether. And I think it's about moving away from just, oh, this is what the world is, therefore I can disagree or agree with it, into something way more interesting, which is about your imagination, your experiences, your emotions, finding a way in which to think about those relationships differently, which is what we are. We're ever moving and changing and shifting. And in there, it's quite hard to kind of nuance this now. I don't think that automatically means dissent, but it kind of does, because it's forming something that wasn't there before. So there's a kind of disagreement with something that might be understood. And I think that's why I think people have a lot of problems with contemporary culture, because it doesn't, the really interesting bits for me don't conform, they might conform to a kind of paradigm of something, but they move something away into something that's found itself anew again. And that's when you get those moments of like a new bit of music that you just, wow, I haven't heard that before. It's like I couldn't have heard that. Or the greatest bits of literature about subjects I really care about seem to come at things kind of indirectly rather than directly. I was thinking about Olga Tokarczuk's books, which are deeply dissenting, about gender and race and politics. Svetlana Alexievich's amazing books, which have done more to undermine that populist idea of Russia, because she never talks about it directly, it comes indirectly. And I was thinking, the obvious art that popped up in my head were people like, they're really kind of soft moments, but actually are really, there's a couple of, I mean, I'll mention names, and I don't mean by any means I like every single piece of work they've ever made, but I know certain pieces of work by Louise Bourgeois are really angry, dissenting things, and yet they appear to have this sort of slightly surreal, soft, almost funny side to them. There's those amazing Goya paintings at the end of his life, which couldn't be more vitriolic and acid-filled, nasty, but they've got this playfulness in them. It's like a sort of, wow, what the hell? And I think, for me, that's what you're trying to strive towards, is something that catches something slightly off-centre. Interesting then, because I understand, in different disciplines, this may well have quite different could be philosophical or political or religious connotations, and I think I didn't know this, I had to look it up, but in the judicial system, dissent is a very articulate way of judges expressing or creating an argument for and against something. And in science, equally, there's a sort of scientific dissent is a whole discipline in itself, which I'd never really thought about. So I understood heresy, having read Umberto Eco. Heresy was something I had a bit more sense in, but never, it kind of didn't apply in a way, but it kind of does. It's again this contested ground, isn't it, where a orthodoxy or a given is brought into question with an oppositional point of view. And in the church, it's massive, isn't it? All the schisms within Christianity that have come up, and hence, heresy is, historically a really big thing, isn't it? A heretic position. But in art, it's like, I was thinking of Andy Warhol as well. Not again everything he ever did, but some of his work is the most, it's so provocative. Amazing. His death and disaster work. just absolutely stuck a pin in a moment in American culture. And that, and you know, we all know the cliches. He just laughed it off, but absolutely phenomenal what he was doing with those particular types of screen print paintings. So yeah, it was a good question, Graham. Um, kind of emotional, I think, Descent, because I can't
Yeah,
absolutely describe it. It's more like an emotional, yeah, you know, you got this kind of urge, nudge, which is one of the kind of base things of what happens in the studio. And it's not articulate a lot of the time. It's a kind of inclination to want to, fuck it, you know, come on. You know, it's kind of strange. So I did
mm,
think because you that it actually Descent is an emotional, um, it's an emotional
yeah,
language. Because if you
well,
try and describe it, for me anyway, it just becomes sloganeering, you know, like,
yeah,
and it becomes like, well, you've got to spell this out then, haven't you? And you can't really. Um,
yeah. Well, I mean, you can, but it then becomes this thing that I think both of us don't have a lot of time for. But I mean, in terms of that, um, you've talked around a number of different coordinates in relation to the emotional drives of dissent, ones that seem far more familiar to me than the idea of saying, you know, I'm against some political issue and therefore I'm going to do a picture of something or the other. Or I'm going to, you know, create this piece of work that is about X or Y's rights or something like that. The language of politics, in other words, and to create these kinds of familiar enough factional positions within cultural wars, which, as I say, is I think deeply problematic for art. So if we think about those emotions, you've talked about, I think, two things, and I'm going to suggest a third, which you didn't say, but I'm wondering what you think of. First of all, just to give it a phrase, it's kind of like soft dissent, right? It's a kind of dissent in which your endeavour, whatever it might be, is indifferent to the prevailing currents of value or orthodoxy. So you do something that is kind of either purposefully or accidentally inattentive to the flow of approval or validation. And so it
mhm.
can be expressed quite quietly, almost as if it is a flower that happens to have accidentally grown in a field. Um, and there's obviously an emotional foundation to that. The second one would be this other thing you did mention, which is a kind of come on, do something, push against something emotion, which may not be kind of I'm now going to present my version of a flag or whatever else, but is nevertheless purposefully adversarial in some fashion or another, and that's very familiar in postmodern art and might be encapsulated by the word shock. That's the second emotional relay. I think the third one, and this is me more than you, but I want to know what you think, and I think you kind of almost touched on it, is auto dissent. In other words, looking at your own work or your own thinking at the time and saying, I'm not going to do that anymore. Or I don't like that even perhaps. But you kind of have within yourself a desire not to carry on doing a thing. Or you decide to stop. I'm just putting rough
Mm.
parallels to you, or you stop using a certain medium or a certain scale of canvas, or you just stop doing what you're doing and do something else because you're no longer doing that thing. Right, so that's almost like a kind of auto dissent, a dissent against something within yourself. And those are both three quite distinct emotional relays to which you each have dissent built into them. The soft dissent idea of indifference, the adversarial idea of dissent against something, and then this dissent that might be internalized or in some fashion or another. Um, well, what I'm just calling off the cuff auto dissent, for want of a less clumsy phrase. Which one of those do you most recognise, and how do you see those categorizations?
Good, Graham. A nice thought um, shape you put together there. Auto dissent, I am recognised as soon as you said it. I think it's part of creative activity. I would argue that anybody who's worth their salt trying to do something creatively has to recognise that, and be really actively engaged in that conversation with yourself. Um, to avoid sort of self-flattery, which is amazing but dangerous, to marvel at your own expertise or whatever, but equally to recognise when it's just not working. Or I think I've talked to you before about points for me would be where I started to make work that really looked like my own work. It had this kind of strange sort of familiarity, and realising that it was just kind of parody of what I do, and I felt at the time it's like really disrespecting the work I'd already made, and it was just kind of like a fake, weaker version of something I've already done, and that's something I'm always having to be very vigilant about. But I think auto dissent is your best friend and your worst enemy, but it's there, and I think I would argue you have it just as much. Um, the adversarial one, I think probably in our education I would be much more actively, I have been very actively advocating, and it became a kind of mission for me in the wider picture, not in the School of Art and Design where you'd think it'd be way more understanding, became like a real fight. It was like the kind of like pathetic territorial disputes where you would have to advocate for the value in a kind of fine art or a particular area of fine art. In terms of standing up for art, I've kind of got mixed views about that. I think in education, I always will be really supportive, and I do have a very wide interest in art in that sense. And I think we need art more than ever in the world, uh, within education systems and cultural systems. It's the first line of attack when you look at what's happening as we speak. The art is the first thing that gets defaced. Artists are kind of whizzed out of situations along with academics and etc. etc. But I'm uncomfortable equally advocating for, you can't speak for all of art anyway, and actually the only art I'm interested in is a very, very specific, quite small individual things that actually, it's probably you could count on two sets of hands. The stuff I really, really feel I would advocate as just being fundamental to being a human being. The difference, I'm using not your words necessarily, but I really recognise indifference as part of dissent as well. So the louder you shout, the less notice people are going to take of you. And there's something about the indifference of being very present but not loud. And I think that was something I recognised in probably the last 20 years of work I've made. I'm actually making very modest, small things, in quite an extreme way, very small, but actually as a total thing can really stand up for something. And I think it was a kind of very much a kind of thought process that I can't say enough about things. You certainly can't say it with one thing, even though there is certain art that's done it So if you broke it down into much smaller, quiet things, maybe the total of it, without ever being this one big, oh, it's about this, could break up into these smaller, quiet moments that in themselves are just kind of really small, quite indifferent things, but collectively. And I suppose because the work's been really, really public, when it got two exhibitions got selected to be the keynote for one in Prague for the One Festival, which was the huge human rights arts festival. It got selected to be a keynote for that, and the same in Skopje in Macedonia. The exhibition was the opening of this. I forget the title of the festival, but it was about voices, and all the speeches were in my exhibition about the need to have, and they used the work as an example, without ever. I understood what was saying because somebody was translating it all, but they said there's something about the quietness of the work, not shouting, but as a collective thing, allowed you into all these different combinations of things which people could relate to. So there's something about the indifference for me is it's just ordinary, everyday, small things that
Yeah.
with them the possibility of not a big shout, loud, hold the banners up, but actually it's a kind of ordinary thing.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
I
it
think,
reminds. Sorry, go
sorry,
on.
I was going to say that was what in the two books I mentioned, the Tokajuk and Alexei. It's just ordinary things every day, but
Yeah.
it's imbued with all the cultural, political, social, all of it. And it's a really fine balance for being just prosaic and kind of, oh well, that's pretty boring, But having this ability to, it just invites you in. It doesn't make you stand at the door and do I want to go in here? It just lets you in, and once you're in, you're allowed to move around without ever being told you should then look at this or that, and if you don't do that, you won't get this, or this work is about this and this and this and this and this. I think that's where Dissent is powerful.
Yeah. It's Dissent that doesn't look like Dissent, then, isn't it? It's almost
Yeah.
like a Dissent that requires you to reject all values, rather than claim that there are better values.
It makes
And
you think about values. That's the thing. Rather than saying, is this a good value or a bad value? It makes you think about them.
yeah.
This,
But I mean,
that,
people commandeer. I mean, I know. I can't remember how to pronounce her second name, but the author who did Drive Your Tractor Over the Bones or whatever it is, that book,
Tokajuk.
which is except Tokajuk, thank you, which is an exceptional book. And when I read it, and then I read some of the reviews, you can see, and it's part of the world of literature, right? People want to find the genre within which it fits, and also to say something about how it is a feminist piece of work, or a work that kind of reflects on a certain kind of historical motif and this kind of thing. And it clearly isn't that. As a story, you can read it, and it just has a kind of basic interest in human nature and the ways in which changing life circumstances and decaying senses of community can affect a person. And so when I read it, I was kind of thinking of quite different things, and then the reviews come out, and that's fine. The reviews are fine, but there is and who knows? I mean, if it encourages people to read the book, then great. So I'm not kind of being snarky about it, but it does create a kind of transmutation of the book, which is a quite involuted. I mean, it only involves 4 people within an area of, let's say, 10 square miles, a forest, 2 houses, and and a city with a further education institution, something like that. So then it becomes part of a genre, or it becomes part of a specific political value. Fine, but it also isn't that at the same time. And the reason why I'm waffling on about that is I remember we had a few conversations about both of our work at a time when we were both getting quite exhausted by performance metrics and impact and engagement and all this bullshit. That it's possible to write or to make art of very few numbers of people and not really to make great expectations about it. We both thought this over drinks quite passionately, that there is a real merit in not being ambitious and thinking about the people who might engage with the things you're doing as people you know, or maybe a small group of people that you don't know, and not and in the process then kind of making this bigger form of dissent, potentially, I'll make it sound pompous, but more sizable form of dissent, in not in reducing one's circles of influence, or not trying to do the global or the impactful and all this stuff. So yeah, I think yeah,
That's really important what you said,
that's my
Graham, because I think in it's kind of I've arrived there, absolutely agreeing with you on that, and see it absolutely in extremitus with the students I work with in Bergen. It's this sort of cultural pressure that makes how would it come out? It's like everything's got to be visible to everybody, so you end up finding the shortest cut to get it visible, which tends to be Instagram or the equivalent. And you know, the idea that as a somebody who makes art, you have to have a yeah, it's like you have to be a product of, you know, easily digestible, easily recognizable, um, and you compete then with the people around you. Oh, you're that person who does that thing, and that's, you know, going to promote me in the commercial art world, and collectors will want to come and collect me because they want that thing that I do. Um, and I think that this thing about everything having to be visible all the time. Why haven't you got an Instagram account? Where's your website link on your Instagram? You know, is the kind of real pressure.
yeah.
Um, and so your work can be consumed, you know, ad infinitum, anywhere, any time of day, on somebody's mobile device. So it sort of begs the question then, and this goes back to auto dissent. Fuck that. You know, I'm not making work to be a reproduction of itself. You know, and the idea that in order for people to see my work, you're probably going to have to come to my studio at the moment. There's an exhibition happening in a couple of weeks in Bergen, so they'll get to see some of it. But the whole thing I'm trying to do is built on its physicalness. It's an object. Otherwise, I should really learn how to use digital auto image generative software better and work that way, and just work with the digital. It'd be, you know, and actually become part of that matrix of art that exists out there. Some of it's really interesting, but it's not what I can connect to. So you've got this thing, you know, well look, there's paintings behind. But they're not anything like that. Of course they're not, because they have a tactile, physical presence about them.
Yeah.
So in some ways, my generation have gone from hawking your work around in order to get exhibitions, where you had to use some reproduction, like a 35mm slide, and you had all these slide holders with your work on it, and you were selected on that basis. But generally then people would come and visit your studio because they said, no, well, we need to see the work. You've said it's this and it's this big or this big. it just doesn't happen anymore because it's got to be digested and clicked, like that. And I think auto dissent, I kind of like, yeah, fuck you. It's like, I'm not trying to be difficult or arsy about that at all. It's just really recognizing, again, it's almost like this indifference to, you know, oh, you've got to, have an exhibition at least 3 a year so you can update your Instagram account and everything. But you just think, for what? I mean, that's
Yeah.
me. Again, for other people, I'm sure you can make your own sense and your own way with that. But it's because it's to do with this resistance I have against. We've talked perhaps before about this. My resistance against the world being consumed just by an image of itself all the time, and you miss the very thing that we experience in life, which is stuff, and our beautiful encounters we have with things. And if we substitute that as an image, then I wonder what the hell, And we know there's a lot of anxiety about that, and it has created a lot of issues. A generation who's coming after us, Graham, and the one after that, I suspect the world will be, for us, probably a bit unrecognisable in a way. Not in a bad way necessarily, but I think,
Yeah.
it's going to create these quite binary friction points, I think. And maybe it's heretic to say, I don't mind AI at all. I think it's playful, it's fun, I don't use it very often. But in terms of art's always been messing about with realities and illusions. It's never tried to say, yes, but am I true? So the AI thing, I think some of the arguments are pathetic. It's like dreadfully ordinary results come out of it. And because it's limited to its licensing and what it can scrape and what it can reconstitute, it just goes back in on itself. And in art, the kind of AI work, I get to see, and clearly a lot of the students, some of them are definitely engaged in it. You kind of go, yeah, but have you not looked at X, Y, and Z's drawings? They're really interesting. Yes, but I did this with this program and it did all this. Blah, 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 blah. And you're going, yeah, okay, fine. There's nothing new in that. It's just tools to do something. That's all. But the ability to, it's back to this thing earlier about imagine the world, which is what art does. Culture does. It imagines the world in a way that when it really connects to you, you couldn't have thought, you couldn't have experienced it. It was that thing that made you go, wow, So if we're only working back on things that are already existing all the time, which is the very simplistic principle of AI, it can only kind of keep preloading itself, and that's politically, socially, culturally the issue, isn't it? Is what licensing agreements allow what data to be shared and scraped. Which, as a principle, just kind of feels a bit, well, human beings are way more imaginative and provocative and incredibly wonky and irregular and irresponsibly responsible and all that stuff. I think my auto dissent is about being incredibly irresponsibly responsible with what I'm doing.
Can you elaborate a little on that apparent opposition?
I really don't care, but I care about it really deeply, and that's I have to approach it like that, because if I get too hot-headed and precious and really fucking committed to it and shit, this has really got to work, generally that just doesn't work. So like these behind, I don't know if you've seen what they look like at the moment. I'm trying to make this piece of work about white phosphorus, and it ended up in what I think are quite kind of beautiful seascapes, as
Yeah,
well as these are more recent. And but if you get close to them, they're ingrained in the background with all this kind of text that you don't actually see at first, which is me really accumulating all this kind of material that I think and read and write, and it just, some of it's very contentious and messy, but you can't really read it as such. It's more like just under the surface of it. So it was finding, okay, I never thought I could do that. I think we talked in the sea episode about it's just impossible. So you're kind of sneaking up on these things. Try not to care too much, but at the same time, I think you said something before. Do I actually like it? Is all I have to go on in the end. And like is a problematic thing, but does it connect with me? Do I like it? And often you just, fuck it, no, come on, keep working on it, get rid of it, do another one. And the bit that you go, well, that's all right, you can't and shouldn't really explain, because it's produced its own, whatever it is, understanding, logic, symmetry, it's come into itself. It's a bit like, you wonder, well, you've had it, you've written books and people write about what you've written, and do you recognise yourself? It doesn't really matter, does it? It can be a bit offensive or a bit flattering, of course it can, but...
yeah, yeah. I mean, that internal struggle that one has when you set your mind to doing something that takes a while is always there. I can't imagine somebody setting an objective and then over a period of time going through well-defined stages to achieve it. That doesn't seem. It doesn't seem to me relevant to writing, or I'm assuming also art. And I think there are these kind of scales of Dissent in a way. And when you've mentioned twice, 2 or 3 times now, these kind of religious synonyms of heresy and orthodoxy, or heresy and canon, those kinds of analogies that you've used suggest Dissent in almost in a metaphysical sense, that you have the possibility of Dissent that is bordering on blasphemy. It is it's a rejection of the existing cosmos, and that's obviously very big and very ambitious, and sort of implies something different. I think the notion of heresy, compared with some of the things that we talked about, which are more fine-grained, almost dissent in a room, so to speak, whereas heresy is a dissent against the cosmos, against the singularity that is God. So do you, what do you tell me something about that? That's a terrible question. What kinds of points of reference do you have when you think about the notion of heresy within art? What does it look like as a project, or what does it look like as an aesthetic?
I don't know. Gosh, I really don't know. I suppose I can probably start now thinking out loud. Think of examples where art has been, clearly there are points where art has been seen as heretic. Is that the right word? Artists have been persecuted for heresy. Thou shalt not make a graven image. And the iconoclastic iconodule debate within the Christian church about the representation of anything based on, you can't represent anything created by God. The iconoclastic idea, to the opposite, saying we are gifted by God in order to create images to celebrate. Runs right the way through Western art history, really, right up to, really, again, examples today where you could, and it still happens, be in the public domain at least, be charged with, it's probably, the kind of obscenity rules, fair enough. I can think of artworks that have, caused scandal. We know obvious ones in the Brit art onwards, that was seen as a kind of heretic sort of gesture. But I don't know, I don't think that's just kind of soft stuff. The stuff that really, again, it has this almost dangerous quality is much more indifferent to things like that, I think.
Or it tends to be. The only things that come to mind for me are religious motifs. I'm wondering if it is something specific to the intersection of art and religion, not just Christianity, but other religions as well. Clearly, one of the most appalling things was the Taliban smashing in those Buddhist sculptures in northern Afghanistan. Right,
Yeah.
I can remember being appalled by that.
Israel has been doing
Most Philistine act.
The West Bank, yeah.
In relation to
the iconic, things that have been happening in Gaza and the West Bank and Palestine, they absolutely went straight to all the religious buildings and libraries and schools and art collections of, incredible personal and global value. You deface the culture, don't you, straight away. And that disgusting human being, Gavir, went and with his son really cockily, didn't he? Championing, the fact they'd taken down another mosque or were going to go and have Jewish prayer, on a very sacred Islamic piece of ground, and it's like, yeah. I think there was the sort of, you're right, actually, when you think about those moments, like what was it, Charlie Thingy, the cartoonist in Paris.
Hebdo.
Yeah. Because of the representation of Muhammad. I've just suddenly got South Park coming through my head. But they had all that, didn't they, about...
You're going to show him?
Yeah, and I think there's a good example. I think South Park, managed to do something unbelievable today with Dissent that is almost unrivaled in kind of popular culture.
Agreed.
And have done it in such a kind of beautiful way. All the stuff around, Trump at the moment, the last episodes, they're a bit patchy, but oh, wow. You thought, are they going to do something really kind of crass here? But they didn't. They did it in such a beautiful way. So that's really good public dissent, I think.
Agreed.
At that point, I thought you were going to show me the red card for my language. You've been shown a red card for dissent.
No, well, you're wearing a kind of yellow card, so you're already on thin ice.
Yeah, it's an away kit.
I've given you a finger wag, referee finger wag, so you know it more. Oh, off you go. I'll not tolerate that. I've got my ref cam on. Yeah. Rugby rules.
Well, we've run to 49 minutes, which is a little over our usual tariff.
It is. Well, there you go, you see. It's because it was such a splendid and interesting interview.
I should say, thanks, Graham. That's been... it's this thing again about approaching things, because I think there's we do know each other up to a point really well, but you coming at asking questions from that position that you came with, and the way you articulate around things, which Yeah, the difference, I think, is it's of great value.
Excellent. I'm very glad to hear that. That pleases me
Yeah.
immensely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So this episode today was sponsored. Well, Adidas obviously have been so generous at the moment supporting
Mm,
our
yeah.
um, and
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else sponsored us this week, do you think?
um,
Tracy Emin? She's edgy.
yeah, I mean, it's almost it's almost too easy to say that. There is something about a work that is, yeah, it's good, but again, it's
Mm,
the thing about Tracy Emin is like that's the work now. It's like her really. Whereas some of the work I've
yeah.
seen, it just sneaked up on you. I wasn't expecting to see a Tracy Emin, and you went, "Well, that's all right," and you think, "Oh, bloody hell, it's Tracy Emin." You know, so there is value there. It's,
Yeah.
she's become the thing, hasn't she? You know, and
She has.
a bit
She's
hard
become a
past that.
fair dues.
Okay, nice one, Graham.
As ever, an absolute pleasure. And yeah,
Next time,
I'll catch you on the next pod.
indeed.
All right. Bye bye.